Regular meeting of the Architectural Review Board. Today is Thursday, February 5th. Could we have a roll call, please?
Chair Pop,
Present.
Vice Chair Guillier,
Here.
Board Member Liu,
Here.
Board Member Kim,
Here.
Board Member Ballantyne.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to get us started, now is the time when we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on any item which is not on the agenda. I have one card in front of me from David Carnahan, and if you'd come to the mic, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Pop. I appreciate the long period of time I've been given to speak. Deputy City Clerk David Carnahan, I'm here to speak with you about board and commission recruitments. Right now that we're entering the spring recruitment, and this time we have 3 terms on the Human Relations Commission, 3 terms on the Public Art Commission, and then 2 terms on the Utilities Advisory Commission. These are all 3-year terms that are going to begin on May 1st and run until April 30th of 2018. The deadline for applications is March 3rd. We're hoping that members of the public that are here or those at home that have any interest in the Human Relations Commission, Public Art Commission, or Utilities Advisory Commission consider applying. We have information in the clerk's office. We also have flyers in the back of the chambers, as well as applications. Let me quickly for 2 of these, a little bit less quickly for the 3rd, explain the membership requirements. For Human Relations Commission, you only need to be a Palo Alto resident. For the Utilities Advisory Commission, membership requires that you are a utility customer or an authorized representative of a utility customer, and 6 out of the 7 members must be Palo Alto residents. Now for the Public Art Commission, it's a bit of a mouthful. I have not found a concise way to restate what's in the Muni Codes, so I will just read it to you. Members of the Public Art Commission shall be members of the Architectural Review Board or shall be professional visual artists, professional visual arts educators, professional visual arts scholars, or visual arts collectors whose authorities and skills are known and respected in the community, and, whenever feasible, who have demonstrated an interest in and have participated in the arts program of the city. So again, terms on the Human Relations Commission, Public Art Commission, and Utilities Advisory Commission. Applications are due on March 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Seeing no other cards, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Do we have any agenda changes, additions, or deletions today?
No changes.
Great. I have one item, 451 University Avenue, which has been requested by the applicant to be continued to February 19th, so we'll look forward to seeing that item at that point. Russ, do you know, is Cara coming today?
It's my understanding that she's going to be here.
Planning to be here? Okay. So I think since she's not, shall I move on to the next item and then we'll come back?
Claire, are you ready for that? Yeah, we can go on to the next item.
Okay, do I need a motion to do that?
I would assume so, to reorder the agenda.
So I'd like to move that we reorder the agenda today, and we'll take item number 2 and then return to item number 1 later. Have a second?
I second that motion.
All right, any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. Let's do that. All right, so we'll move into a study session for item number 2, which is the Downtown DAS project. A request by Crown Castle for Architectural Review Board study session regarding conceptual designs for a downtown DAS, or distributed antenna system installation, of approximately 19 units located on existing light poles and 1 utility pole, primarily along Lytton Avenue, Hamilton Avenue, and side streets off of University Avenue, for Verizon Wireless. This is a follow-up discussion to the ARB study session held on June 19th, 2014. No action is to be taken on this project. It's for discussion only. And with that, is there any staff report for this item?
Yes, good morning. I'm just going to do a brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over to the applicant. So the board did review this, some concepts back in June of last year, and today we have some follow-up based on discussions that we had in the summer. Staff did take some time to walk all of these 19 sites that are being considered. And one of the things that we were looking at is just making sure that there was enough space along the sidewalk for the sizing of this cabinet or what the faux mailbox storage thing or whatever it was. But we were basically looking at how it impacts the adjacent parking space, like can people open their doors and things like that. So these are things we were considering. And also one of the things we were looking at too is the adjacent building. A lot of the buildings where these sites are being proposed are adjacent to 2+ story buildings. So tenants inside the building will have a very clear view of the equipment that are on the poles. So just things that we were thinking about. And basically, I think that's sort of it. I think the applicant has some additional concepts to show you today as well, aside from what was in your packet. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So please introduce yourself, and we'll give you 10 minutes for our presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Martin Hevesy. I am the project manager for this particular DAS project here in Palo Alto. I am an employee of Crown Castle, and I brought 3 different concepts for different types of, of poles in and around the downtown area. We can walk through each one of the designs. You're welcome to ask questions, and I can clarify why we chose the direction we did. When we last met, we did take into consideration your desire to make this system co-locatable for other carriers. So there won't be many number of DAS nodes, there'll just be a handful. We'll try to keep it to this as best as possible. So a couple of the options here have pluses, minuses. A lot of the poles in the downtown area vary from older style green fluted to stainless steel plain poles to actually a wooden pole. So there's a couple different reasons why we chose the poles we did, and I want to walk you through some of the concepts. The first plan I want to go through with you, everybody here, is the 390 Waverly. It's P12. For this particular pole, it's a wooden JPA pole, and the enclosure we're showing on the plans, if you look at page D2, is a self-venting, mid-pole mounted. This would go right on the side of the pole. The gear we've chosen is passive, meaning it has no active cooling whatsoever. It emits no noise. And with this particular type of an enclosure, it would allow air to free flow, would not need any additional cooling. This type of an enclosure with this gear would be 100% silent. Page S1, the next page, shows the pole in its form today. Page P1, option A, shows a replacement of the pole. Due to the extension on the top, we would bring in a brand new pole and mount 2-foot panel antennas with the gear at about 7 feet at the bottom, 10 feet to the top. Actually 10 feet to the bottom of the enclosure. In our 19 pole selection, there is only one that is wooden. This is the only wooden JPA pole in the actual design. The original design included traffic signal lights, but those are, we don't have an agreement to use those poles, so we've changed the design somewhat to use regular poles, street lights, and one wooden pole. So the only change from option A to option B on node P12M is the change from 2-foot antennas to 4-foot antennas, just to show you guys a visual concept of how that would look.
I can't find that particular, oh, I see.
A second page, yeah.
P12M, I see that. That's, okay, I was just confused by your page numbering.
Okay.
I get it now, okay.
So this is one concept we've chosen, so. We can look at 513 High Street. That's Palo Alto 01M. This pole today is an older style green fluted luminaire. The concepts we've chosen to bring before you today are antennas mounted, 2-foot antennas mounted above the pole with a faux mailbox as the cabinet enclosure on the sidewalk. For areas where we have room for ADA clearance, we feel that a ground enclosure is the best method to house the gear and also provide enough room for other carriers to come and use this facility without visual change. So option A shows the gear. It would be in the proposed site in the green mailbox on the sidewalk. All cabling would be inside the pole. All cabling from the mailbox to the pole would be underground. And if you look at page P2 for option B, the option here we've depicted shows an enlarged base on the pole, which would house all of the DAS radio gear, and the antennas at the top are mounted slightly below the light arm on the pole. Two different concepts, and we are okay with either concept, whichever you feel is best for the area.
Excuse me, is the placement of the antenna relative to the style of enclosure important, or we could have the antennas above with the enlarged base or the antennas below with the mailbox? It's interchangeable?
They're completely independent, so you can have either style with either enclosure. So that's Palo Alto 01M.
Before we go on,
Yes.
is there any technical driver to keep the antennas above or below?
Technically, no. The change in rad center from above the pole to below
just
the arm,
beneath the arm.
Yeah, is just for visual effect. There is no significant change to the coverage. Okay, if you go to look at Ramona Street, there's a couple of other options on 470 Ramona. That's node 3M. This is a stainless steel light pole. We've also chosen to show this one with the vented enclosure on the mid part of the pole. Page S1 is the pole as it is today. The first concept we've shown here is the faux mailbox with the antennas above, and that would be on page P1. There's existing photos and proposed photos. And for the option B on page P2, we've chosen to show an enlarged base with the antennas mounted directly below the light arm. The base chosen on page P2 for node 3M is a green hexagonal base. It would actually be a gray square base for the steel poles. It would match the pole in color. And that would be a correction when we submit for actual permits. These are just for concepts and open discussion today. The last option I wanted to bring before the council today is on page P3, option number C for node 3M depicts 4-foot antennas on the pole with the vented enclosure on the actual pole itself. That would mean no ground furniture, nothing on the sidewalk would be placed or enlarged. All the gear would be housed on the middle part of the pole.
So just on that one, I'm just going to ask quickly, it looks like relative to the height of a car, essentially, that antenna is almost the same height as a car. Is it exaggerated a little bit potentially in the image, or do you think it's pretty visually accurate?
It's pretty visually accurate.
All right.
I wanted to show the council how a 4-foot antenna would look versus a 2-foot. In some of our deployments, the 4-foot panels match the pole better because it's actually a slimming effect when you pull the antenna to make it taller versus a 2-foot. 2-foot sometimes can catch your eye a little bit more easily than if you had a 4-foot.
Oh, so the antenna itself is 4 feet, but, and what about the panel, the power panel that's on the pole?
So the enclosure on the pole is just to house the radio gear. The antennas would all be at the top of the pole.
Got it, okay. And what is the height of the radio gear, and how high would it be above grade?
The height of the bottom part of the shroud is at 10 feet.
And overall, it's how tall?
The shroud's about 4 feet tall.
Okay, thank you.
There's no option to make those shrouds less than 4 feet tall.
Unfortunately, no, because we want to enclose 2 remotes and have room for growth. So if we had to bring in another provider, we would have some room. One of the issues we faced when we brought this to you guys initially is it was designed solely for Verizon and only had enough room for one provider. Some of the feedback that we took from our last meeting with council is that we would like this to be designed to be more accommodating. So we wouldn't have individual DAS nodes throughout downtown. We would have basically one system that could be shared by the providers. We're trying to bring a design that's not so large that it's a visual eyesore, but not so small that we can't expand it internally to include other providers.
All right, terrific. So I don't have any cards from the public. Now would be the time when we would ask the board, ask the public to provide any comments that they have about this item. And unfortunately, I think it would really benefit all of us if people from the public who I anticipate would have something to say about this item would participate. And so people at home, I'll encourage you to write letters, give us opinions, forward this information. Again, today is just a study session, so we're not making any decisions. But at this point, I'd like to just circle through the board for any further questions or any comment or direction that you'd like to provide to the applicant for this study session. So, Alex, why don't we ask you to begin?
I was just wondering if staff could clarify for us the wireless review process, because it's a little different than our regular building projects. And I know this is just a study session, but if I just want people to understand, like there's the shot clock and stuff, and it's different than our regular review process.
I will take a stab at that. So for this particular project, this is the second study session, and generally when we have more than one DAS type of installation, we want to bring it to the board to get comments on the design. We did do the AT&T DAS project previously, but this is not AT&T, and it's a different kind of design, so that's why we're here trying to get feedback. So basically what we're trying to do now is we're going to move, the next step for this applicant will be they're going to do their formal submittal. We will bring that back to the ARB for the formal review. And then there's a very high likelihood that the project will be appealed if it's consistent with how all of our other cell projects are being done in the city. So basically, we're going to take it through the design review, and then if it does get appealed, we would take it to the council for their final action. Basically, for all of our cell projects, there's a specific shot clock requirement, and probably our applicant can speak to it better than I can. But basically, when you have, there's 2 different types of projects. One's a co-location project where there's an existing wireless facility and you're adding something to it, and then there's a brand new facility. So these projects would be considered new facilities. So the timeline is a little bit different than a co-location project. And it's 180 days, is that right? From
I believe you're correct.
Yes, it's 180 days. So what happens, day 1, they can submit an application. We need to get comments back to them within 30 days, which stops the timing for the review and the shot clock. And then once the resubmittal comes back in, then the clock begins again and we keep moving forward. So basically within those 180 days, we need to be actively progressing towards an action on the project. It could be said that we have to take final action within 180 days, but generally that's the goal. 180 days is to keep moving forward, so within that timeline we have an action on the project. So I think that's a general understanding. Thank you.
One more question for you. And then our purview is aesthetics and not
That's correct, yes.
health and whatever,
That's
or
correct.
technology or anything like that.
That's
Okay,
right.
thank you. We'll pass the baton.
Board Member Liu, do you have any comments or
Well, I think
directions
this
you'd like to provide to the
Oh, I
applicant
see.
at this point?
I see. So we're doing a study session, so it's sort of less structured. Then I would just say I generally like everything that you guys, all the changes that you have made so far. I think the idea of moving it more mid-block than right on the corners is a really good decision. And all of the things that you've shown have so far have been fairly sleek and fairly minimalist. I would say of the options, like I'd like I think my preferred option is the one for the metal poles, the green metal poles. I think that looks great, and I like the idea of the faux mailboxes on sidewalks that are typical 12-foot wide downtown sidewalks. I think some of your locations are on some of our side streets, which have really much smaller I don't know whether they are 6 or 8 foot sidewalks to me. And in that case, some of the faux mailboxes may kind of constrict, pedestrian flow or whatnot. And so may actually, in some of those locations, it may actually be better to have it on the pole, instead of having it on the sidewalk. And I too was a little bit concerned about, I think Claire had mentioned just views of people up on the second floor looking directly out onto the equipment, but it seemed like most of your locations were picked fairly carefully. I think it was, I thought maybe I saw like one where I thought, oh, maybe that might be an issue, but I think generally I think the locations are good. And so that's all that I have at the moment. Thank you.
Board Member Ballantyne.
I have a couple questions for you. I wonder if you can help me understand how are all these co-locating relationships actually going to work? Because, so for example, if we just take, actually let me back up. Before we get to that, can I clarify, are you proposing then all these different options, you've proposed them as specific to certain locations, but should this be received as a Chinese menu with respect to, oh, well, we can put these pieces in wherever we want, or is the Waverly Street option A really just for Waverly Street because it's a wooden pole?
Well, our goal today is to bring to you various options because the poles in your downtown area are not consistent. They're not the same from block to block. And like Councilperson Liu mentioned, the sidewalks vary in depth from the curb. Some have room for ground cabinets, some do not. So we wanted to bring to you different options for your review and feedback. And when we do submit for our formal plans, each of the nodes will be individually tailored with its own specific design to the type of pole and the amount of room we have on the ground. Now, if you told me today you really don't want to have any type of a ground enclosure, you'd prefer a larger base or all the equipment mounted on the middle part of the pole, that's feedback I would take with me and fold that into our formal submittals and new plans for each one of the poles.
Okay, so the formal application will then include tailor-made for each specific site proposed.
Correct.
Will it also include any of the data driving the need for this many sites?
The need for this many sites is based on two factors. Number one is Verizon's need for capacity and the fact that we're using lower output radio gear. The radio gear selected for this particular proposal is a 5-watt output, which is relatively low to a typical cellular site. So in order to get the coverage and the capacity Verizon is looking for, we do need to have that many individual poles.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt just for a moment.
Yes.
I want to make sure that the board understands that it's not our role and it's not our purview to discuss the methodology of providing service, how many of them are required, how they're oriented. Our job is to talk about what they look like and how the functionality that we're being told is required is implemented. That's the only thing that we're really permitted to talk about, because otherwise it's regulated and we really don't have the ability to influence that. So just, I want us to be careful that we don't overstep our bounds in any way about this, and make sure that we're focused on the right task here today, okay? Thanks, sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. So where I was going with this is the co-location down the road. I'm trying to understand the long view ramifications from an aesthetic place. So from aesthetic place, if we come to you and we say, well, you know, the mailboxes are really nice for that particular application, but then we have a capacity problem, and maybe 3 years from now we have 7 mailboxes in the same spot. So what I'm trying to do is understand from the long view the ramifications, saying we really like the mailbox on the ground. Well, there's a relationship problem down the road. Are we going to be able to fit 7 carriers in that one mailbox, or are we going to end up with 7 mailboxes? So that's where I was going with my line of thinking.
That's perfect. And actually, you don't have the benefit of having been here, but the last time this application came to us, I think that was the major concern from the board, was to talk to staff and ask for direction about whether or not we can encourage carriers to co-locate. Is this going to allow us to have a whole series of these all combined within the same equipment, or are we going to be littered across the downtown with these items in a short period of time because each individual provider needs their own equipment? So I think, you know, that's a certainly very relevant question.
So, in answer to your question, the mailbox or ground cabinet design is built to accommodate more radios, more gear in the same enclosure. For example, if we construct the system tailor-made for Verizon's use right now, and next year AT&T would like to use the same system, we could put their gear inside the same enclosure. We wouldn't need a separate enclosure for their radio gear. We'd also be using the same exact antennas. The antennas are multi-port, they're all 6-port antennas, so we would have enough room on the existing system to add carriers, Sprint, T-Mobile, whoever else wants to come aboard, without changing the visual outlook of each one of the nodes.
Right, and I guess this is where we get into the hairy place of regulation versus the ability to say aesthetically our city doesn't prefer 7 mailboxes on the ground, when in fact AT&T might say, well, we can do whatever we want, and we need a mailbox too, and Verizon has a mailbox, so we get a mailbox. So do you see where I'm, right, so it's very difficult from where we sit right now with our hands sort of tied by various things to be able to give a recommendation that has long view value.
Correct. And it's Crown Castle's desire to bring a solution to Palo Alto that's not so large as to accommodate every possibility that it's a visual eyesore, but that it does have the additional capacity and the room to grow, you know, with the city and with the technologies that you know, year to year come up.
Right. I just want to acknowledge for everyone present and the public the difficulties of navigating this particular idea from an aesthetic perspective. So given that disclaimer on our responsibilities, I should just give you some feedback.
Please.
If I'm looking at page P12 of the 390 Waverly Street, and I'm just imagining the public comments that are going to come back from the person that sleeps in that bedroom. I want to just clarify, so that particular box that's mounted 10 feet from grade, that is one of the ones that will make no noise. You said that's a passive.
Correct.
Okay. And I would just give the feedback, you know, if that was my bedroom window, you know, I wouldn't want to be looking at a 4-foot installation. So, you know, I would definitely opt for the 2-foot, but I would be venomous about even accepting the 2-foot. I did scan that site. I think that is a little bit difficult to find an acceptable, that's a challenging street with respect to pole locations. But I might suggest to go back and look if you can technically find a different spot, just because of that existing. I don't think that building is going anywhere. I am now switching to the sheet P1 of 513 High Street, option A. And I know that Board Member Liu is liking the green mailbox. from where I sit, looking at the long view, I'm concerned that we might end up with many of those. So I would opt for the equipment in that shroud to be pole mounted, given the two choices. The other thing that from where I sit aesthetically, I really think that the antenna itself look better under the arm of the lamp rather than on the top, because it's a little bit shrouded by the neighboring trees, at least in this particular page, P2 versus P1. And then if I flip to the last set of drawings you submitted, so 470 Ramona, I'm on page P3. Of the 470 Ramona option C. And I guess I share the same, I don't know if it's an articulated concern from Chair Pop, and I know that there's this whole, we want to be able to expand our facilities. But that's that 4 feet tall, even though it's mounted 10 foot above grade, that's a long span. And I know that there's the perception that we can elongate and pull the eye up by having it 4 feet, but I'm not sure that's necessary. I think technically, if you really delve deep, I think technically, so I should tell you, I'm a device physicist in a prior life, so I take the geek approach here, and I think that if I were to delve deep into that, I could redesign that. Not my purview as a member of the ARB board, but I'm just saying that I'm dubious that is really required. And I do here we see the antenna mounted under the arm again in sort of a sleek, minimalistic fashion, and I'm aesthetically responding to that.
Thank you very much, Board Member, Vice Chair Clear.
Okay, seeing as though, like I said, we are somewhat limited as to, it's the old thing that everybody wants their cell phones to work, but nobody wants to see these things. So I'll keep it easy. On the 513 High, I prefer option B. On the 740 Ramona, also B. And on the 390 Waverly, I prefer option A. I'd rather see a tighter package like that.
All right, succinct as usual. Board Member Kim.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of lead you through my train of thought here. I think ideally, I would like to see, one of those passive antennas be thin enough so that it matches the width of the pole. And I think, that's in the ideal world. And then, of course, the antenna, as far as being mounted above the arm or below the arm, I think below the arm is a little bit more elegant. Now, having said that, I realize that there are limitations in doing that, but so I'm thinking, okay, well, mailbox, that's kind of nice because it's again, another elegant solution where you're not adding any width or diameter to the existing base of the pole. But I also wonder about the pedestrian access. Some of those smaller streets or even on these larger sidewalks, if I'm with a bunch of friends or walking down, do I know that mailbox is there? And then as far as going with, the design where there is no separate base, but it's mounted at the base of the pole, I think it's low enough where if I'm parking, I'm not typically looking at how wide a base of a pole is. I'm looking more so if there's a pole or not. And I just worry that if, there's a pole, I'm going to open my door however much, but actually the base is so big that, I can't open my car door or I get a scratch in the car. So it's hard for me to say which I necessarily prefer, but just kind of wanted to lead you through my train of thought there and thinking through. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Well, thank you for being thoughtful about the presentation today. It's really great that we have the options in front of us that we have to look at and to provide feedback about. I want to start with a quick question to staff because we did ask you to coordinate a response and to evaluate whether or not other carriers might be co-locating. I think the concern is about visual clutter and this multiplying over time to a point where we've got mailboxes on every corner. You know, there was this really funny New Yorker cartoon years ago of a beautiful beach that was perfectly clean that had a trash can about every 10 feet, right? So it said, "Don't litter," and it was, you know, all you can see is the trash cans. I'm worried that that's likely to happen here in Palo Alto 25 years from now, that we're going to have so much gear all over the place that all of a sudden it's very unpleasant. And so can you tell us what work has been done trying to evaluate how co-location might work, whether or not this is really likely to be successful?
So I don't think we've studied it in any formal way. I think the carrier, Crown Castle, has certainly been thinking about this because it's an opportunity for them to bring on additional carriers for their equipment, and it's a revenue generating situation for them. I think in this stage, the FCC regulations seem to be constantly changing, and it does impact how we move forward with reviewing these types of projects. It's a little bit difficult to tell where we're going to be in the future with how we can regulate it, and definitely as time is passing, we are being more restricted on what we can actually be reviewing. So I don't really have a good answer for that at this moment. Maybe when we come back for the formal discussion, we can kind of prepare something a little bit more for you to think about, but it's a little bit unknown right now how things are going to be moving forward.
So I'm just cognizant of the shot clock issue. And once the application's in, we only have so much time to respond. And so I'd like us to do as much homework as we can in advance of that. And if that means, you know, deeper interaction with Crown Castle in order to help evaluate this and make sure that we've done our homework and we're doing the best we can to predict the future, I think that's important because, you know, this many antennas in the downtown is going to be a big change from what we have now. And then if we see another application like this and then another one, it's going to start to be challenging, and we're just trying to head that off before it happens. So anything that you can do in advance, I think the board is going to appreciate that.
Yes, and definitely we are working on revising and updating our submittal checklist, and part of our requirements will be that it's going to be a formal requirement that they have pre-application meetings with staff to kind of talk through some of these issues, so it helps to streamline this process. And this is part of what we're doing today too, is trying to get in front of the board early, discuss the design concerns, so that way when we move it forward, hopefully things can be better with at least the design aspects of the project. For this particular project, because they're on light poles, it does have a conditional use permit, so that does help us with some future monitoring of the project as well.
All right, that's terrific. And then the last thing I would be concerned about is there some legal language that needs to be implemented to ensure that there's no limitation on co-location within a mailbox, that one carrier owns that space and other carriers can't get access to it. So we just need to make sure that the right language is in place to facilitate additions of other equipment when future applications come forward. I think that my comments are relatively consistent with what others have already said. In general, I prefer the mailbox solution. I think that the larger base on the poles is problematic because you won't have the ability to control the dimension from curb in the same way. It's centered on the pole, unless you can do some type of an asymmetric design, but I'm not sure I'd prefer the way that would look. So in general, I think that the mailbox seems like the right solution, and you can get the sizing of that right. I'm a bit concerned about the signage that might need to be placed on that, or what might need to be done to make sure that the public doesn't expect that that's a mailbox, that they can put things in. I'm sure it's not openable, but at the same time, it's an issue to just manage that. In the same way, I think that the design that has the antennas lower is better. It helps to just contain it all within the visual character of the pole. And so I think that in general, that consistency is correct. I think Board Member Ballantyne's comments about the placement of the Waverly pole is I think it's the Waverly pole. Yeah, the Waverly pole is right on target. And if there is an opportunity for you to just shift that in terms of a location so that the visual impact of that for that particular building is reduced, I think that would be great to evaluate. If the answer is we've looked and we can't move it because it goofs up how the signal works, then we'll understand that. But anything you can do to minimize that would be great. The other thing I would like to ask you to help us understand is there a way to make these more slender, to make them more slight? You know, anything we can do to reduce the dimension overall, particularly in light of the concern that there might be more of them on the pole at some future point. I'd like to understand that. So we're hoping that you're using the very best available technology today, because that aesthetically will allow for the least impactful visual character.
Correct.
All right. Any closing comments?
I did also bring some real-world examples from some of the systems we've built in other areas of similar style multi-carrier poles that we've done in the past. So if you care to see those, I could also leave those with you.
Is it like a handout that you have, or is
yeah,
it?
just some printouts here. If you wanted to see them, you could share them with.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, and then Russ, I guess we'll need to get these documents and any of these images into the public record. So make sure we have copies of that we can share with everybody around. Board Member Kim.
You were saying that the more slender, higher mounted on the pole systems were, they don't make any sound?
Correct.
Does that mean the base units will make some extent of sound? And how much sound exactly?
The mailbox design and the enlarged base design are all fully enclosed, and they will need to have some type of a cooling fan.
And are those running consistently, or does that depend on the traffic of consistency?
It would run 24/7, and it would be no louder than a fan for a PC.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you. So on the option that has the enlarged base,
Yes.
so you're thinking that the light poles would be they would be removed. You have a new metal base, and then those same poles are put up on top of the new base. So we're saying that the poles would be now taller than they are, or you're saying that the total height is going to be of the pole is the same, and you're building something around it. Okay.
Correct. And for any pole with an enlarged base, we would actually do a complete pole replacement. We've spoken to the utilities department about that, and if we do bring in a brand new pole, we would give Palo Alto a spare in case of an accident, a truck knocks it over, which is common. We would provide that. And also answer the question about opening a door into an enlarged base. We did take that into consideration into which poles we would select for that type of a design, and we wouldn't choose one that had right in the center part of a parking spot. It would be at a spot where the parking spots don't line up. So we would put some thought into providing enough access for a door swing on cars.
And then in that case, would these new poles be like stainless steel, or would they be like the old cast iron like fixtures?
Like for like. If it was a fluted green pole, it would be a fluted green replacement. We've got a number of manufacturers that can fabricate us a pole to very specific designs.
If my memory serves me right, in years ago, I mean, the city was trying to replace the green light poles even in residential neighborhoods, and got all sorts of grief about that kind of change. And so that path seems to me to be filled with potential conflict. Like, it seems like the other solutions are far safer. I'm not necessarily opposed to the enlarged base, but it seems to me that that's be like the most challenging way of going forward on this one.
So tag teaming on those comments by Board Member Liu, what prevents those green poles, so I'm referencing the High Street installation example, what prevents those poles from being treated like the other ones with the shroud mounted 10 feet above grade? Why do those require sidewalk mounted equipment?
They do not. Typically, when you have a fluted style design of a pole, mounting equipment to the pole becomes challenging, In most cases, you would take a metal band around a cylindrical pole, and that yields good strength. We don't have problems with that. We don't see that requiring a lot of maintenance. On fluted poles, it's much more difficult to get a really solid, firm attachment of pole-mounted gear. So in most cases, when we have a fluted pole, we don't like to mount the gear mid-pole unless we have a specific custom pole that's designed for that application.
Okay, so if there's a pathway that requires custom fabrication of the pole anyways, then it would make sense to have this whole discussion about ground-mounted stuff go away, just put it on the pole. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, that is a correct statement.
Okay, so really the only thing that is driving this whole mailbox versus ground-based installation at the bottom of a pole is the technical challenge of mounting onto a fluted pole.
It's twofold. It's that challenge and also the fact that we're trying to bring the system that is going to be expandable without visual change. If we do the pole mount solution, we're limited by the size of that enclosure. And already you've given me some comments that it's fairly large, and it would need to be to accommodate multiple carriers. If we have a ground cabinet, we have a lot more room to work with to bring in additional carriers without their own mailbox or without their own enclosure. We could do it, and it would look the same as before when we were complete with adding additional carriers.
Okay, so just to summarize what I think you've said, is there's two challenges, right? One is the technical problem of mounting to a fluted pole, which I would submit is completely solvable. And the second is you have to mount to a fluted pole with a significant amount of weight / volume.
Correct.
So I think those are things that can be solved, my personal opinion, especially if we go into this with the reality of co-location as a pipe dream. So, which I think might become extraordinarily clear once we start delving into the regulations and do a study of what the FCC is dictating. I think what we might discover in about an hour or two is that we can't really design or give aesthetic feedbacks with respect to co-location being an actual reality that's realizable in the city of Palo Alto.
Again, I'm happy to provide you with real-world physical photographs and designs from some of our other locations. For example, up on Highway 50 between Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe, we have 24 nodes. 18 of those are ground mount cabinets that each house 5 remotes feeding one pole in one cabinet.
Okay, so let me see so 5 remotes is 5 different carriers, is that what you're trying to clarify?
It's 4 carriers because Verizon is using 2 remotes at that location.
Okay.
But we've got Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Metro PCS inside one cabinet.
So what you're saying is that it's co-location is not a pipe dream in other places and it's happening?
Yes.
And you can provide examples of?
Yes, ma'am.
I see, okay. Well, we may or may not be able to even speak to those, so.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that I'm really saying that we need to figure out how to co-locate. And I'm not in agreement with the comments that you're making about it may or may not happen. It needs to happen. We need to figure out how to make that happen. And as a part of this, we need to solve how that would work, because I'm not willing to approve a project that litters the downtown with these things all over the place. I think what you've done up on Highway 50 is a great example, and I appreciate that. That's what we want to see here. Anybody have any further comments? Great. Thank you very much for coming for the study session. Really appreciate the early information, and we'll look forward to a review of the formal application.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great. All right, so with that, we're going to move back to item number 1. I think we have everybody, and we're ready to do this. So item number 1 is ARB bylaws and procedures, which will be an amendment of the bylaws of the Palo Alto Architectural Review Board and adoption of Architectural Review Board procedural rules. Our senior assistant attorney, Cara Silver, is here with us today to lead us through this. If you do that for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Cara Silver, Senior Assistant City Attorney. So we have 2 issues here that we would like to discuss. First is the set of bylaws that we are proposing for amendment, and second is the set of procedural rules. And earlier this year, I talked to the chair, and he suggested that the ARB establish a set of codified procedural rules. In the past, you have been operating under, a sort of modified Roberts Rules of Order, but those procedural rules have not been codified, like we do have codified rules for the City Council and the Planning and Transportation Commission. So we thought it would be a good time to, codify the rules for this board. When we went to look at the bylaws, we realized that the bylaws actually require you currently to follow a formal set of Roberts Rules of Order. It's unusual that boards of this type follow the full set of Roberts Rules of Order. They're very complicated set of procedural meeting rules, and most bodies are moving away from that. It's a big stack of rules. So what we're suggesting as sort of a cleanup item is to modify your bylaws to give you more flexibility to adopt your own set of procedural rules, and we're calling that the modified Roberts Rules of Orders. So that's essentially what the bylaws amendment does. It also just makes a set of cleanup changes that are shown in your packet in red line strikeout form. The real meat of the issue is the procedural rules. And so these procedural rules have generally follow the City Council and Planning and Transportation procedural rules, but they've been modified to take into account, the specific needs of this particular board. For instance, we have modified some of the time requirements to accommodate your board and to reflect past practice. We have also modified the quasi-judicial procedure where, and just to refresh your memory, a quasi-judicial hearing is a hearing that applies to a particular project where you are serving as essentially a quote-unquote judicial officer, in which case you need to be unbiased and impartial and take an action that the public will view as fair and informative. So most of your actions, of course, do apply to are taken in the quasi-judicial format. And so it's important that you be comfortable with the rules that apply to quasi-judicial hearings. And so what we're suggesting in this case is that for all quasi-judicial matters, that like with other boards, you are permitted to talk to applicants privately, so outside of the board, but of course you cannot talk to them with a quorum present, and because that would violate the Brown Act. You can, though, have an individual meeting with them under these new proposed rules if you think that that meeting would be informative to you to get some particular details about the project. And then you have to disclose the contents of the meeting at your public hearing in order to allow the applicant or the project opponents to understand and be informed about evidence that you have collected in a private forum, and so that would then be disclosed to become part of the record. So that's one of the distinctions between the quasi-judicial rules that the Council and Planning and Transportation Commission follow, where in their set of rules, these types of meetings are permitted, but they are discouraged. We thought that for the Architectural Review Board, you're in a different situation, and that it may be that these types of meetings may be informative, and so we have allowed for that type of meeting, again, provided that it is disclosed on the record. Let's see. Also, with respect to just procedural rules, I prepared sort of a Robert's Rules of Order cheat sheet for you. We have 4 general types of motions. The first motion is just your standard main motion, which requires a second, and there is debate. And the order of debate typically starts with the mover of the motion, and then the seconder of the motion, and then everybody else can debate. Then we have what's called a friendly amendment, and that is something that does not require a second, but it has to be accepted by the mover and the seconder of the main motion. If that friendly amendment is not accepted by the mover or the seconder, then the person can make what we call just a formal amendment, and that does require a second. And if there is a second, that gets incorporated into the main motion, and then it is voted on as a whole. I passed them on, yes. And then finally, we have what's called a substitute motion. And what a substitute motion does is typically actually reverses the main motion or substantially alters the main motion. And it takes precedence over the main motion. It requires a second. And because it takes precedence, it is voted on before the main motion. So those are the typical motions that we follow in, a modified Robert's Rules of Order. I think that your current practice reflects this, so it shouldn't really change things in your meeting style, but it formalizes it. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
First, let me just say thank you for all the effort and time you put into getting us organized. I appreciate that you recognized that we were a little out of conformance and have worked hard to this point to get us where we are. I'll start with Board Member Ballantyne. If you have any comments or questions,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
I have some questions for you. On part 3, the quasi-judicial hearings. So what is and what is not? Sometimes I think these things happen as not quasi-judicial, but they sort of become quasi-judicial as you go along. So I wonder if you could give some examples of attributes of what would be a quasi-judicial versus not situation.
Sure. So really when an application pertains to a particular piece of property, for instance, a review of a commercial building, major architectural review of any piece of property, that is a quasi-judicial action. And again, most of your hearings really are quasi-judicial as opposed to other boards and commissions in the city. An example of something that is not a quasi-judicial action, which might be easier in connection with this body to understand, is when a zoning code amendment that you are being asked to comment on, or a policy in general that you're asked to comment on. For instance, the build to line, which I think happened before you came on the board, but that is not a quasi-judicial action. That's considered a legislative action because it applies citywide, or actions that apply to many different pieces of property are not considered quasi-judicial. But if they focus on just one particular property, they generally are quasi-judicial.
Thank you. My second question.
Amy, do you have any
Oh, go
further
ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe another example was kind of one we just had, which if there's no application on file and it's a study session, then we aren't adjudicating at all, passing recommendations formally in a formal way. But is that kind of what you're driving at, is here we have something we know is coming in and we're already giving some kind of advice. So that kind of is the blurred line situation where we don't have an application on file, but we're dispensing some or indicating direction. Yeah.
In that situation, since it's generally clear that an application is eventually going to be filed, I would treat that as a quasi-judicial item.
Yeah, that was where I was going. Thank you, Amy. So then, very specifically, I think there's some, in these quasi-judicial rules, there's direction given to the applicant, right? Discussions with the applicant. But what about discussions of the owner of the property? Would those not fall in the spirit of the law in similar vein to the applicant?
Yes, good point. So in our planning process, we require the owner to sign all applications, and so typically the owner is the applicant. It may be that the architect is the public face with the, in front of this board, but we treat the owner as the applicant, and yes, that term should be broadly construed to be both owner and applicant, and we can modify the rules if that's not clear.
I think it should be clear. Go ahead.
That would be nice to just mention that in here. And also, I just was going to say, this is one of the reasons, typically I see it, we didn't have it on here today, but why we say request by applicant basically could be architect on behalf of owner. So it's clear when the agenda comes out, who the parties are to the public, not just the architect who submitted the application. Yeah. That's all I had to say.
Okay. So then I just wanted to then clarify that where this sort of chain of communication is allowed versus where it stops. If I, for example, were to go out and talk to the neighbors, when I reported in and that piece of property was coming up for discussion, would I need to then disclose my discussions with the neighbors? Are they also in this broadly construal of our definition, or do I not need, since they have a vested interest, but they're not owner or applicant?
Right, absolutely, you must disclose that as well. So again, the purpose of a quasi-judicial hearing is to make sure that all sides, both the applicant side and neighbors who are perhaps supporting or opposing a particular project, who have an interest in the project, are given the same amount of information that the board has, and has an understanding of all of the information that the board obtained by researching the property or through a site visit or through a conversation. So yes, you do need to disclose those types of communications as well.
Okay. And, okay.
So move around and give you an opportunity to ask more questions. Board Member Kim.
I don't have any questions.
Board Member Guyer.
Well, when I saw this, it's interesting. I mean, I was just under the assumption that we were working with the modified rules. I've read both. I remember the old-fashioned book you used to get with the Roberts rules, and when I first started, being on various boards, I read those, and it's like, oh my God! And then I realized there was a modified version, so I was just under the assumption. And it's interesting, some of these things, like the whole thing about the chairman versus the chairperson, I'm sorry, but I figured for a city like Palo Alto that this would have been taken care of 25 years ago. But I guess it's the old oversight and forgot about it, but yeah, I'm fine with everything that's here.
Great, thank you. Board Member Liu.
I just have one question for you. Is under the disclosure, I've noticed, like when I've gone to like BTC and council meetings, that they disclose differently than we have historically in the past. And I think in the past, we've just said we had a meeting with the applicant and left it at that. But I noticed that like at PTC, they actually say I was at a meeting with these people and we talked about these things. And I was wondering if, are we supposed to do it at that level, same level of detail as the PTC and the council. And I think that's on your, you have a disclosure section, right, on page 14.
Yes, thank you, Board Member Liu. Thanks for bringing up that point. That's a very good one. It is up to each board to sort of monitor its own disclosures and come up with a procedure for tracking those and disclosing them. The purpose of disclosure rules, as I mentioned, is to provide information that you obtained that is in these private conversations that is not currently in the public record. So if you had conversations and obtained information that was no different than what was in the staff report, there wouldn't be a need for a very detailed disclosure. And that's typically what happens at the council level and the Planning and Transportation Commission, is that sometimes these contexts occur before the staff report has been prepared. And so applicants or project opponents just want to give board members a preview of the project. And so the disclosure is very simple, and it just, you know, oh, I didn't receive any information that's not currently in the staff report. However, if you do receive information that is outside of the staff report, that's not contained, then your disclosure should include all of those discussions. And so that's what we have codified in these current rules, is to make sure that everything that is, you know, relevant to a project be disclosed, so that members of the public know what information you are basing your decision on.
And then do you recommend that we keep like a log or something written as opposed to just you know, here where it disappears after about a month?
Right, right.
Is there a process that you would recommend?
You know, that's really up to each board member. There are some, you know, board members on the PTC who have, you know, written out their notes, and then, in fact, they don't even read them into the record. They just provide them to, you know, the secretary of the board, and then they can get published on the website or something like that. So really, you need to just, you know, adapt a practice for you that works.
So great, thank you.
Great, so we've been working on this for a couple of months now, so most of my questions are already taken care of. I did come up with one thing that I recall from my own personal history on this board that was a bit of an issue, and I wanted to just get your opinion about how we might handle this. So I had done some work for another architect. I had been hired as a consultant by another architect to do some work for their firm. And as that architect was listed as the applicant for a project, not that the owner was the applicant and the architect was their agent, but that the architect themselves was listed as the applicant, I could not participate in the hearing because there's a rule about not participating in hearings a year after you've had that kind of interaction, where I'd been paid for services by that person. And I actually hadn't worked for the owner of that building. I had worked for the architect that owner had hired. And so I felt I was capable of being completely impartial about this. It wasn't really related to the work I had done for this architect, but because the architect was listed as the applicant, it knocked me out of the hearing for a year. And this is a prolific architect in the area. And so I wanted to just ask, just sort of following up on one of the comments that Board Member Ballantyne made about the language of applicant versus owner. And I'm wondering whether it might be appropriate for us to really be clear about the owner being the applicant, even if the architect is the one who files the application, that, you know, the architect is an agent for, or some way to navigate around a limitation like that. So if there are board members who are working in the community and something like that comes up, it doesn't preclude them from participating in hearings for a year.
Yes, and I did make a note to clarify that. I think that is a very good suggestion. One distinction, though, is that, you know, the issue you're talking about is a conflict of interest issue, and it's not addressed in these particular rules. So you would still have to monitor that. And I think that the way we notice things also are not really addressed in these particular rules, but we hear your comments, and I think that we can, at a staff level, work to on the agenda noticing and make it clearer that the actual applicant is the owner or the developer. And then I would suggest when you get to a motion that you direct staff to make a clarification that the ex parte rules apply to owners, developers, applicants, and public members. So that if you have conversations with any of those groups of people regarding the project, that all of those conversations be subject to your disclosure rules.
That's great. Just a couple of very quick nitpicks on this. On page 13, the last paragraph, number 2, there's a double period after the word informative. On page 15, in the paragraph numbered 7, I think the word state should be capitalized. And on the final page, under appeals, I wanted to just, oh, this isn't a nitpick, I'm sorry, this was a question for you. So, as a board who just recommends to the director, we're not a decision-making board, we're just a recommending board. Is there actually an appeal process that could happen at this board? I don't recall ever seeing that happen, and so I'm just wondering, what is this language in reference to?
Well, let's see. You are the board that would hear a request for hearing on a staff level decision. So, we list these on the end of our agenda. So that's technically not an appeal, but it is, somebody challenging staff level architecture review that we have done on behalf of the board. So then now you are adjudicating, whether staff's decision, will stand in a sense, or you might recommend something different than what staff has done, in the event that somebody calls that hearing up. And give that to the director, who is then the next decision maker.
All right. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that essentially staff is doing a great job, and we haven't had any appeals like that in as long as I can remember, and so we're just not seeing that happen, but it's possible.
It's a very real possibility.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, great.
At some point.
So I'd like to make a motion that we accept both these procedural rules and the modifications to the regulations and bylaws as they are presented, with the clarification that the ex parte rules include owners, applicants, and public as a component of the disclosures.
And developers, I think was earlier.
Developers, really anyone. So if you can find the correct language to incorporate that for us, I think we'll all rely on your expertise to take care of that for us. And
I'll second.
great. Any comments?
Chair, one clarification. We also recommend on the appeal section that you modify the language to say appeals and requests for hearings of minor staff architectural reviews.
Great, I'd be happy to accept that. Vice Chair Guyer, since you were the second, will you accept that change?
That's fine.
Great. So let's vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Great, so that passes 5-0-0-0. Thank you again for all the work it took to get this to this point. Really appreciate you getting us organized. All right, so with that,
Wait, 1 second.
I'm sorry.
Did your motion include the bylaws?
It did.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think my motion was for the procedural rules and the regulations and bylaws. Great. Terrific. All right, moving right along. So we're now at the point of the meeting where we ask for any board staff announcements, updates, reports, or comments. Is there anything anyone wishes to bring forward today? Great, so the only thing, Board Member
Has
Kemp.
there been any discussion on the design awards, and as far as, will that take place, when, how?
There hasn't, but we need to have that discussion, and we need to look at our calendars and contemplate, basically, it's either, what's your preference? A retreat where we kind of hunker down around a table together, which is, I think, how we've done it in the past, followed by maybe another meeting or so. And then I guess it's the pleasure of the chair to take a straw poll on that, or
So,
let staff know.
I think probably what we'll do is I'll get together with staff and we'll talk about what the process could be and try and identify a draft timeline, and then we can bring that to the board. Maybe we can try and do that by the next hearing. Great. Okay. The only other thing that I wanted to bring up today was there was an unusual discussion that I had with Russ in regard to signage. And there were some signs that were installed on a building in Palo Alto that weren't consistent with what I've seen the board approve in the past. But these were signs that were approved at a staff level. And when I read through the signage guidelines, it was pretty clear that the guidelines are not very clear about this. And so I think that I'd like to ask all of you to take a look at the guidelines and read through those, make sure that you understand what they're about, and then I'd like to agendize a discussion, maybe a month from now, something like that, where we talk about potentially adding to the guidelines. I think it's very difficult for us to regulate the exact type of signs that are allowed in Palo Alto, but I think our guidelines establish recommendations for design and for applicants, and it might be that including some of the language that this board has often reinforced would be a good idea. Please.
So just wanted to ask a clarifying question. We have a code, the zoning, the sign code that's Title 1620, I believe, and those are not really guidelines so much as requirements. And then there are the downtown urban design guidelines, and then we have the El Camino Real design guidelines, the old version and the new version. And the new version doesn't talk much about signs, but the older version does a bit. So I guess when you refer to guidelines, what are we referring to?
I think what I'm referring to is that it's confusing, and it's not really crystal clear. And where the specific example is that this board has often been very clear about saying they're not favorable about internally lit cabinet signs that have letters that glow versus halo lit signage or push-through letters or other types of things. But the signs that I'm seeing installed on brand new buildings are cabinet signs that have glowing letters and in some cases even glowing icons, logos for the buildings. And so I just think it would be a good idea for us to read all of that documentation and figure out whether or not we need to make some recommendation about how to do this so that the board and staff are aligned about how we're going forward.
I think I could help out with that by, excerpting the pieces of those guideline documents, and then just, refer you to 1620, which is the municipal code online.
That would be great.
I mean, everything's online, of course, but, wading through the pages of the guidelines for the different parts of town
If you can lead us right to it,
challenging.
that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
All right, so any discussion, Board Member Valentine?
No, actually, you were a step ahead of me. That was where I was going. I was thinking, let's make it easy for the Wade, and thank you for offering to do that.
Board Member Liu, did you have anything you wanted to say?
No, I think you guys have addressed it before. But I think also, I just want to make it clear, we don't approve most of the signs. They're staff level, and then if there are exceptions, then they come to us, or if it's a master sign program, then it comes to us. But To your point, I do see inconsistencies in
And that-
what's been approved by whichever group.
Actually,
or body.
I appreciate your point, and that is exactly why this came up, is that I'm very much in favor of staff taking care of all of the signs that they take care of. I don't think every sign needs to come to the board. We really should just be dealing with exceptions. But the problem that I saw was that there was a misalignment between the way we were commenting about and directing signage when an applicant would actually come to us versus what staff was interpreting.
And I think, of course, we can talk much more on this later, but just one point is, we do try to encourage applicants when there is a new building to show where the signage will be going. So the debate about how high on the building, whether these canopies are going to support signage well or not, and we try to make applicant, you lead the horse to water, but sometimes they still don't show where it is on the building. And then, of course, there's the specifics of the lighting and the other things that, they wouldn't have thought of when their building has come forward, perhaps. So.
And I'm relying on the other members of the board and myself to try and include that as conditions for applicants when they come forward. But for the simple ones, I think we want to just make sure we have alignment. Any other items to come forward? All right. So I think with that, we'll adjourn the meeting today. We have one item on subcommittee, which is 180 El Camino Real, and we'll take that item now that the meeting's closed. Thank you very much.